the Babylonian captivity that we just read in chapter 32 of Jeremiah above. So, checkmate. 37, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, a byword among all nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee. Verse 38, thou shalt carry much seed out into the field, and shall gather but little in, for the locust shall consume it. Verse 39, thou shalt plant vineyards and dress them, but shalt neither drink of the wine, nor gather the grapes, for the worms shall eat them. 40, thou shalt have olive trees throughout all thy coasts, but thou shalt not anoint thyself with the oil, for thine olives shall cast his fruit. 41, thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. All thy trees and fruit of thy land the locusts consume. Pause. Obviously, these curses are regarding the occupations of Greece and Rome in the Holy Land, not Africa. Anyways, reading on, 43. The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. Verse 44. And he shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Verse 45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed. Because thou hearkened not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded thee. Pause. This is clearly referring to the destruction of the Holy Temple and the final exile of the Jews by the Romans in 135 CE, which I would assume the black Hebrews would know nothing about, because it only really comes out apart from in Josephus only in the Talmud, a book that the so-called Jews supposedly made up according to the black Hebrews. And it's a bit silly that one of the claims that the black Hebrew Israelites make for these curses not being applicable to modern-day Jews is because the Jews of America are so affluent. Now, this had to be an American movement, because everybody knows that this wealth and prestige that really only began 100 years ago in America, which, might I add, was the time the black Hebrew Israelites started claiming Jewishness, wasn't consistent throughout history. Friends, you have to open your eyes and look at the rest of the world from where the American Jews arrived from. And notice that there are basically no Jews in those lands. Why? Because they were tortured and massacred. Honestly, what's 100 years in a 3,000-year Jewish history of oppression? Reading on, verse 46. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. Verse 47. Because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. Verse 48. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until he hath destroyed thee. Pause. After quoting this verse, the black Hebrew Israelites show you pictures of Africans with iron yokes around their necks. They'll tell you, you see, this has to be specifically speaking of blacks. Well, if that's the case, why does Jeremiah quote it when referring to the Babylonian exile? In Jeremiah 28:13, it says, Go and tell Hananiah, this is what the Lord says, you have broken a wooden yoke, but in its place you will get a yoke of iron. And just to reconfirm that the iron yoke and the black African aren't synonymous in any way, it says in Jeremiah 28:14, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says, I will put an iron yoke on the necks of all these nations to make them serve Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and they will serve him. I will give him control over the wild animals. Black Hebrews, huh? Friends, this is Bible 101. Anyways, 49. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Pause. Here a black Hebrew will tell you that because it says far from the end of the earth, it must be talking about America. Again, some knowledge of biblical Hebrew would come in useful here, because Eretz, the word that they translate as earth, doesn't really mean earth as we know it today, as the planet Earth, because it really means land, right? Eretz Israel doesn't mean the planet of Israel. Now, this point is not so significant. I'm just making it just in case anyone tries to say that it's specifically referring to the newfound land of North America, rather than just any place outside of Israel. As a matter of fact, this is just how Daniel uses it when referring to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4:22. Verse 22 says, "It is thou, O king, that art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown, and reacheth unto the heavens, and thy dominion to the ends of the earth." And we know that geographically it didn't. And then the black Hebrews will tell you to take out a dollar bill, and they'll say, "What's the national bird of the United States?" It's the eagle. Ah, you see, America, the land of our bondage. First of all, it states nowhere that the eagle, actually literally in Hebrew, vulture, is the symbol of the oppressing nation, but that's fine. Let me ask you something. What was the symbol or mascot or bird of the Roman Empire? That's right, the eagle. It was even the bird of Nazi Germany, who in the last century alone massacred millions of Jews who held on to their Jewishness when it wasn't popular and died with the Shema on their lips. But black Hebrews called them imposters. Yeah, right. Verse 50, "A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor shew favor to the young." Verse 51, "And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle, and the fruit of thy land, until thou be destroyed. Which also shall not leave thee either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kin, or flocks, or of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee." Pause. Again, here it's clearly still referring to the same curse, and here it proves to be the Roman Empire who occupied Israel on their land and stripped them of their resources and destroyed their temple. Verse 52, "And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, until thy high and fence walls come down, wherein thou trustest. Throughout all thy land he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, throughout all thy land, which the Lord thy God has given thee." Pause. What gates did America or the slave traders besiege in Africa, right? I mean, did they even have gates there? It's really ridiculous. Do you guys bother to read any of these curses in context before you present them in the... Verse 53, "And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee, in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee." Pause. Now, here it's making a reference to the Babylonian siege, where Jeremiah quotes the same verse in Jeremiah 19:19. "And I will cause them to eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters, and they shall eat every one the flesh of his friend in the siege and straitness, wherewith their enemies and they that seek their lives shall straiten them." America, huh? I don't think so. Anyways, verse 54, "So that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eye shall be evil toward his brother, and toward the wife of his bosom, and toward the remnant of his children, which he shall leave." Verse 55, "So that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children whom he shall eat, because he had nothing left in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in all thy gates." Verse 56, "The tender, delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness, her eye shall be evil towards the husband of her bosom, and toward her son, and toward her daughter." Pause. Here they'll tell you that this is describing the feisty black woman. Nice, huh? Verse 57, "And toward her young one that cometh from between her feet, and toward her children which she shall bear, for she shall eat them for what all things secretly in the siege and straitness, wherewith thine enemy shall distress thee in thine gates." Verse 58, "If thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in the book, that thou mayest fear the glorious and fearful name, the Lord thy God." Verse 59, "Then the Lord will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continence." 60, "Moreover, he will bring upon thee all the diseases of Egypt, which thou wast afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee." Pause. Again, in the context, it's clearly, literally speaking of Egypt and not America. Anyways, reading on, verse 61. "Also every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of this law, them will the Lord bring upon thee until thou be destroyed." Verse 62, "And ye shall be left few in number, whereas ye were as the stars of the heaven for multitude, because thou wouldest not obey the voice of the Lord thy God." Verse 63, "And it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught. And ye shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it." Pause. It's interesting that the black Israelites teach that they were sent to their captivity from Africa. But here it says that they'll be sent to their captivity from off the land of Israel. It states, whither thou goest to possess. In other words, Israel, because remember, they still haven't entered Israel at this point when the curses were given out. Verse 64, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all the peoples from one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. Pause. Again, here it's referring to all the many exiles that Israel later had, where they were scattered across all the conquering empires. Anyways, reading on, verse 65. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest, but the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. Verse 66. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have none assurance of thy life. Verse 67. In the morning thou shalt say, would God it were even, and even thou shalt say, would God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart wherewith thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. Pause. Friends, now this next verse is basically where the black Hebrew Israelites claim that the case is closed. So, let's read it carefully. Verse 68, the famous verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Pause. Now, please note that we have shown that every other instance in this chapter where the word Egypt appears, it's literally referring to Egypt, the geographical place of Egypt that the Israelites departed from. And the black Hebrews will even lie and tell you that the word Egypt means bondage. In Hebrew, it doesn't mean bondage. I don't know what language are they talking about. And black Hebrew Israelites will also tell you, why would they have to go to Egypt on ships when they could just walk there? Well, for some reason, I don't think these black Hebrews ever bothered to look at a map. Friends, what is the quickest way to make it from Egypt to Israel? Obviously through the Mediterranean, which especially at the time could only really be reached with over 100,000 slaves securely by ship through the Nile that cuts through Egypt. As a matter of fact, historians teach us that the main reason that Rome had such a huge navy was to transport slaves. Actually, they also teach that 25% of the whole Roman Empire were actually slaves, and not specifically black ones, because for some reason these black Hebrew Israelites think that every slave that ever existed in human history was black. And also at the time of the Roman Empire, the Egyptian slave markets were in Alexandria, near the Mediterranean. But, you know, friends, you don't have to take my word for it. Munter, the famous Roman historian, writes, now that Beitar had been captured, everything came under human control, while Palestinian Judah was reduced to a desolate mound. Captives were sold into slavery in numbers too great to count, for they were brought to the grand annual market at the terebinth Elo tree in Hebron, or in other words, Hieronymus, to the tent Ohel of Abraham near Hebron. Each slave sold for the price of a horse. Those captives who were not sold there were brought to the marketplace in Gaza, which, because of the great multitude of slaves who were sold there, it was called Hadrian's marketplace. And those who were still not sold there were herded